meeting, and we're going to get ready to open the public meeting. So, could you read the...
Sure. Thursday, June 13th, 2019, 6 p.m., public information hearing. The Harwich Community Preservation Committee will hold a public information hearing on Thursday, June 13th, 2019 at 6 p.m. in the Don B. Griffin Room, Town Hall, 732 Main Street, Harwich, Mass. 02645, pursuant to MGL Chapter 44B, Community Preservation Act, Section 5B1. As part of its study, the committee shall hold one or more public informational hearings on the needs, possibilities, and resources of the city or town regarding community preservation possibilities and resources, notice of which shall be posted publicly and published for each of 2 weeks preceding a hearing in a newspaper of general circulation in the city or town. Your attendance is encouraged to learn about the Act and to discuss possible projects consistent with the Act and to review the submittal guidelines. The Act includes projects related to open space, community housing, historic preservation, and recreation. Application information is available online at http://www.harwich.mass.gov/community preservation committee or at the town administrator's office.
Okay, we've read that. Now, can I have a vote to open the public hearing?
Make
I
it a
don't think you need one, but
We're going to do it anyway.
I move to open the public hearing.
Can I hear a second?
second.
Okay, public, all those in favor?
Aye.
Public hearing's opened. Okay, guests, you're willing to step up to the mic? Mike, please identify yourself.
So Christopher Clark, Town Administrator in the town here. I thought what I would do is to go through a couple of, in the 4 different buckets. I know recreation has its own unofficial bucket, but some of the needs that the town has, I think part of this is to gather and have some of the needs of the community as I see them. This isn't a complete list, but it's at least an item to kind of get us started, hopefully, in terms of the conversation. So the first area that I had, and some of these are in the capital plan that we have, that we put out and publish. So some of the ones that I'll refer to are on that plan. I think in terms of the first category I'll take is housing. So not only am I the town administrator, but also I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust. One of the things that I've seen since I've been on there, we have had a tremendous amount of success so far with the land transfer parcels. So we have those parcels that town meeting designated. We have a meeting next week to talk about how we're going to develop those parcels for affordable housing. The concern that I have is that in the time that I've been on the committee, I've gone over to Yarmouth. Yarmouth has a development. The town's contribution for that development is $2 million. Eastham has a development that they're engaged in, and it is their commitment from the town through their trust too is over $1 million. So we have about $800,000 in our trust fund now to work with, but some of these projects do require a fairly significant cost, if you would, or a contribution from the town or from the trust. The other is, I'm not going to get into too many specifics, but there are a few private developers who have approached the town in regards to doing friendly 40Bs or partnership with the town. Some of those developments, one of them in particular, I know they're looking for upwards of $3 million for the town to participate with them in. So some of these tend to be much more significant. Obviously, the more significant the dollars, the more significant the number of units that we could impact the need to address the affordable housing issue in the community. We probably do need about 300 units, just as a round number, that we have to try to work towards to make a dent and to get us closer to the 10% goal that is set by the state. Currently, we're at 5.5%, so there's a ways to go. And I'm not going to be here all night, so I'm just going to keep this kind of on recreation. I just wanted to, from some of my discussions with Eric, certainly the chair is a member of recreation, can speak to some of these better than I, but just a couple ones that come to mind. On White House Field, certainly an asset of the town. We have the Harwich Mariners play at the White House Field. They are a nonprofit. They do have a separate funding source. But we did have some information come in that the lights that we have up currently have been somewhat defective. And we are in the process of trying to maintain and keep those lights up. But to replace those lights are probably in the neighborhood of $400,000. So I wish I could say things are getting cheaper, but everything seems to be more expensive as time goes on. One of the things that we're trying to do, and I think they met with the Recreation Commission, the Harwich Mariners, is to try to put together a strategic plan. What makes sense to do with that field. Certainly they're one of the users of the field, but they're not the sole user of it. The Monomoy Regional uses it, and Recreation, I believe, has some use for that field. So doing some joint ventures, have them maybe pay for a portion of the lights, and we pay for a portion of lights through CPC, is something that I have envisioned. And I know I've been trying to say to the different groups that when we move forward, if it's $1 million or $2 million effort, if we can phase that out over several years, it probably makes it more palatable. So I think that the two things at that field that come to mind immediately would be obviously the lights, and then we do not have ADA bleachers. So the bleachers that are there, you cannot get up in those bleachers with a wheelchair, which is unfortunate. So I do think the ADA was passed in 1990, so it's been a while since that's been passed. So I think it is something that we do need to look at as a community to do something to try to remedy that. They did that at the Monomoy when they built the stadium. I know one of the other areas is Sand Pond. The Recreation Commission is seriously looking at Sand Pond. We used to have, I think when I first started here, they had swim lessons. I guess it wasn't a very good pond for swim lessons, so they did move swim lessons over to Long Pond, and now we're trying to find, through the Recreation Commission, a couple of better ideas for how can we use Sand Pond. So I think some of the concepts would be potentially to, and I think this is part of, I don't want to call it a master plan, but a study that Recreation Commission is working on, to see what features we may want to put in there. So maybe contrary to some of the beaches that we have, maybe we could put in a playground area, have paddle boarding, maybe do a few other features that aren't necessarily all swimming related. Picnic area, it's actually a pretty nice treat area with a lot of grass. So I think that they're engaged in looking at that over the foreseeable future to make some revisions to that site. So something that could be of significance in terms of projects. The next area would be on historical. Historical, I know that this board has already approved, and it's greatly appreciated some of the beginning works on Brooks Academy to look at that. I believe we broke that into 2 or 3 phases, so there will be additional requests as that work is done. So I think that asset is something that needs to be looked at. In terms of historical, I'm sure there's other ones that probably come to mind. I know that you guys had funded also, and we do need to finish an assessment of Alber House. So we have Alber House that is going to be a needs assessment done to what that building needs on the outside shell in order to preserve that. I would say also, just on the historic, I did attend a private meeting, if you would, by the developers in West Harwich about Captain's Row. The town does have a commitment on Captain's Row to redo the sidewalk system and the roadway. So the state has committed $6 million to redoing that roadway. That would be $6 million invested in, I think it's 2023 or 2024, to redo the roadway. But there will be some elements of that project that if we wanted to add historic elements to it. One of the things that they had, some of the folks in that neighborhood, I think it was Acorns, were kind of part of their the mantra, if you would, or some of the elements of some of the design. So if we wanted to put up a period type or try to go back and duplicate some of those historic features, that may be something that we would be back to get some supplemental material. And certainly we have had some in the past efforts from working with that neighborhood about trying to renovate some of the historic homes. I could see additional requests potentially coming from that neighborhood. And then lastly is open space. I know real estate and open space, I'll let Kathy kind of maybe elaborate more on some of their efforts, but they have been looking at materials and locations for additional open space. I think we've done almost a project a year since I've been here for open space. So I think Mike Lack and the folks at Harwich Conservation Trust are very active in that area. One thing that's potentially exciting is they have a interest in Deacon's Folly, a property down there that they own, are in the process of owning, I believe. And they have an interest in potentially doing a partnership where the majority of that property is wet and natural, but there is some property up by the roadway itself that may be for housing. So it may be an opportunity to do a kind of a, I don't know, a joint venture, but something with them in which the town is engaged with some housing. So those are just some of the concepts that I was kind of jotting down the notes. So I think in terms of the needs for CPC, I think there's a wide range of needs that are needed in the community, and the funding that we have received in the past, I think in terms of housing in particular, we probably will need continue to have additional funds in order to really make these projects work, because it's very expensive. And I think just from the recreation, just looking at lights being $400,000, these projects are very expensive. Certainly as town administrator, my job is to try to match up where we can, free cash and other funding sources, but we do rely, administration does rely pretty heavily on CPC for those areas in which your buckets allow you to expend money on. Thank you.
Any questions from the board for the town administrator?
Thanks.
Nope.
Oh, Chris does.
Chris?
Just repeat how many housing units we need to get to state level again?
I
You
think
say
we're in the
300?
neighborhood of about 300.
Yeah.
And that number is a moving target, and what do I mean by that? When the 2020 census is done, they'll do a new count. And the one thing that we will have, which I don't know is good news, bad news, we may go up as a percentage because they only count year-round houses. So every time we lose a house to a seasonal person, the good news is we don't have as many. The bad news is we still need housing for people to live here year-round. So I think even though the census may show that more housing has been lost, which I think it will, to seasonal homeowners, for the affordable housing element, that may be positive, but for a community, we won't have those housing units we need in order to have people stay here on the Cape.
John?
Can you say a few words about what other towns are doing? You mentioned Yarmouth and one other town that are spending north of $1 million on development, but what sort of development?
Yeah,
Is a town, fully town-owned development? And if so, what is it? Is it single-family? Is it multi?
Yeah, great question. Because they are other towns, I've only been a guest, so I'm not as intimately familiar with all the details. But I think both of them, let me do Yarmouth first. Yarmouth, the town did acquire a site. I believe it was a kind of a brownfield site, so they did acquire a site, and then they selected a developer to come in and construct. I believe it's 3 large units, about 60 units in total. And then they have a kind of a common room, not a common room, I'm trying to think of what you call that. Like a community center part within the development.
Common area?
And kind of a common area. And they have kind of an area where you can walk around. It's right on 28, and I think it does look pretty nice in terms of it. All these projects, though, it's a significant amount of money. What really makes them work is the affordable housing tax credits, state funding, and then what the persons that go and start renting from them contribute towards it is all part of their financing, but they definitely need the town in which to make those numbers work. So in Yarmouth's case, they own the property, they contracted with a developer to develop the site, and their contribution has been about $2 million. And Eastham is the other location. Eastham had about $1 million. That site was also, that was town-owned. a town-owned site, and they did contract with a developer to come in and develop that. That, they took a little different approach. The Yarmouth approach was a little bit more bigger units, and then hallways to have more units in the number of units within a building. The Yarmouth one, the Eastham one took a different approach where they have 3 or 4 units per building. So they have probably 18, I think it's 18 units in that neighborhood that they are developing. And they do have I want to say playhouse, boy, I'm trying
Like
to
a
think.
clubhouse?
A community clubhouse is what they have for gatherings. So if people have parties, or, somebody has a retirement party and want to have 100 people over, or 50 people, you can go into their community room and do it. In their model, it was kind of interesting. I think they came up with about 800,000 initially. As they were going through, the federal tax laws changed, and they needed to come up with an additional 300,000 to kind of address some of the tax law changes. And they did also, I believe, contribute money towards putting in water lines, so they paid for some infrastructure into that development. But just to give you a flavor, those are 2 bigger projects, but both of them are about 60-plus units.
Would the town be looking for more than 60 units in any particular?
For us, it depends upon what the private developers, in that case, comes in with. We have our meeting next week is to establish a priority list for those land transfer articles, which ones we want to pursue. So if we decide to pursue, for instance, Oak Street, that may be, it's only 3 or 4 acres, so it would be a smaller development, a smaller site. But that's what we're going to find out next Thursday, which ones are kind of low-hanging fruit and which ones are going to take a little bit longer.
As you're developing this concept, the amounts of money that you're going to be needing is probably going to exceed
Correct.
the housing, so what are you looking for as far as relief in that capacity?
Yeah, as I've been before you before, and the approach that we would take is whatever the trust could do, we would do within the means of the trust. What Yarmouth does, which I think is actually a pretty good idea, is anything above the means of the trust, we would do a partnership and come in together or support any developer that comes in, and they would make a separate request. So it would be a direct request to the CPC. They've been advised in terms of, too, how much revenue that we have, so. Obviously, we commit 10% for housing, but you have 70% that's uncommitted, so they would be seeking uncommitted funds, part of the uncommitted funds.
And Bob?
Yeah. Does the town have any large, more parcels that can be transferred to the land trust now? Or if we do need more land, would the town have to buy it and then transfer it?
I think our goal as a trust is to try to see what we can find. In the low-hanging fruit is what we presented at town meeting.
Right.
One of the parcels that we presented at town meeting was over 20 acres. So I think there are some. It's going to take a little bit more legwork, probably working with real estate and open space and staff to go find additional parcels. But we are committed to finding additional parcels. One of the things that's a real challenge is we found a fairly good-sized parcel on Earl Road, but after subsequent research, we're not going to be able to use it. That's actually has been dedicated for essentially open space purposes in Article 97, so we can't reuse it for housing.
Yeah.
So there are going to be some of those challenges. When we find a parcel, are we then going to be able to use it for the intended purpose?
And you say, you've done the low-hanging fruit, but there's clearly a lot of empty space in the town, but I suppose a lot of it's because owner's unknown and things like that. Is that where a lot of work would need to be done to pull it together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there are town-owned parcels that would be under the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen. So
Right.
those would be the low-hanging fruit, because then it would be easier because it's already town-owned. But there are a fair amount of parcels that are also owners unknown. In that case, as we are in the process of doing with Judah Eldridge, although Judah Eldridge has been more of a challenge than I would have hoped, but I did identify that. That was for conservation purposes. We could certainly identify some of those parcels that are owners unknown and take them for eminent domain for the purpose of housing. So that certainly is an avenue that's open to us. I think as a committee, at least our initial look at it is to see which town-owned ones we can identify first.
Okay, thank you.
Any other member? Thank you very much, sir, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome.
Thank you. I probably should have gone first to paint a picture, but in any case, I'll go second.
You are.
My name is Andrea Aldana. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at the Community Development Partnership, and I'm also part of your housing coordinator team as part of the contract that the town has with the CDP. And I'd be remiss if I didn't make another plug for housing. Of course, we always have to keep beating the drum and explaining how important it is to keep paying attention to housing due to the current housing crisis. And this crisis will certainly continue as the data shows. So just very briefly, the housing market, just like any other commodity, is subject to supply and demand forces, of course. And just to talk a little bit about demand, Chris mentioned that there is significant pressure from seasonal homeowners. The pressure on the market right now is higher for seasonal than it is for year-round. And of course, that doesn't mean that seasonal homes are being created on top of year-round homes. It means that year-round units are being converted for seasonal use, and so you're losing year-round housing stock. On top of that, Harwich is projected to have some modest population growth over the next decade for sure, coupled with an increase in number of households. That sounds a little funny to have, there's 1.5% population growth and 3.3% increase in households. That's because household size here is decreasing. So you're getting more pressure from second and third homeowners and more pressure from the people who already live here. On top of that, just something to keep in mind is that when you look at the 5 highest growth industries on the Cape, healthcare, for example, it takes 1.4 to 3.3 earners in any of those industries to own a home here, and that's just a median priced home. So one person cannot afford to live here by themselves. And 3 people is certainly a lot of earners to have in one household contributing toward a mortgage, and not a normal circumstance. So there's a lot of challenges with the demand side of things, but we don't really have a whole lot of control over demand. But we can control is supply. So if you can't affect demand, then you can affect supply. As Chris mentioned, Harwich is only at half of the minimum goal, which is described in the regional planning statute. That 10% is a floor. I just want to be clear about that. It's not a mandate. But when we're talking about 10% of housing, that has never been an ultimate goal. It's always just been the absolute minimum. And so being halfway there is great. But given that the seasonal demands will continue and with the census that number will change, it's really not a useful metric if that number is increasing but people are not having more opportunities to actually live here. So I guess I just want to highlight the importance of your role as a CPC. In other communities in Massachusetts that have had a lot of success in exceeding their 10% for housing production goals, they have very strong CPCs that work very closely with their trusts. Given that we're in this moment where you have a brand new trust, this is a really important moment to capitalize on, to take advantage of. There's a lot of momentum in the region to support housing, and obviously that positions Harwich to make some really great decisions now before we all become Provincetown. And if I can just switch hats and put on my CDP hat rather than my housing coordinator hat, I'd urge you to look at models in other towns that have actually increased their allocation to housing. Provincetown is the closest example. That is an option. But before I leave you with just boring data, I just want to highlight a resident that lives in your town right now, and I'll leave this with you. This is a story that the CDP included in our recent media campaign. There's a young woman living in your town right now named Amber White. She works more than 40 hours a week, but she still can't find a place to live, and so she's living with her parents trying to pay off her student loans and hoping that she won't have to leave the area. And this is just one of many stories like this that I hear all the time. So with that, I will leave you with Amber's story, and thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for coming. Any questions from the board? Chris?
Sorry, I didn't understand the comparison to Provincetown. Could you go through that?
Oh, sure. So the 10% is the minimum allocation for community housing initiatives, and other communities in Massachusetts have increased that 10% to another number, whether it's 20% or higher, of the amount that you would allocate toward community housing initiatives.
And where does Provincetown come into this? I didn't get that.
They are a local example of a community that has done so.
I think that's 70%.
70% minimum?
They allocate 70% of their CPA funds toward community housing.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay,
I think Cambridge does 20%. There are other examples.
okay, I understand now. Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Ma'am. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Patty Twork. I'm the new president of the Board of Trustees at Chase Library in West Harwich. And my purpose for coming tonight was to just let you know that the board will be submitting a CPC application in the fall. Our building was built, the front of it, the main part of the library, was built in 1907. We have the original front door and entranceway, and it is in serious, serious disrepair. I missed the boat by not getting an application in last year. So I wanted to let you know that we are planning to do that. I'm in the process. I contacted Tom Turchetta, who's in Brewster, and he is a preservation carpenter. I contacted Jeremy Ballard of Ballard Preservation in Falmouth, and I'm waiting for him to get back to me. And I actually filed an online single commission request to the North Bennett Street School. It is in Boston. It is a school that trains people in old world crafts, so they have a specialty in architectural and preservation. And so you can request a single commission, send pictures, tell them what your project is, and they will send it out to their graduates and alumni. And I talked to the woman there, and she said there were many alumni on Cape Cod. So we are looking for a very specialized person to do this front door, because it's going to probably need to be taken away and a temporary door put up until they can actually repair a lot of the beautiful detail work that's there. And then the front entryway is going to, the glass on the side, the caulking is all leaving. So we're really concerned about it. So I will be filing that in the fall. And so one of the questions that I had was, because I'm starting the process now to get the estimates, does the new application require more than 3 estimates? Does the new application require, the 2019 application require more specifics in the detail of the work to be done? I just want to make sure that I get all the bases covered for this.
It's going to be available online as of July 1st, but the changes that have been made are not significant to what you're talking
To
about.
what we're doing?
No.
Okay. All right. And I have no idea what the cost will be. Questions?
Anything from the board members?
No?
Just to clarify,
Yes.
Go ahead, John.
what you're talking about is the entryway. It's not other work or other parts of the front. It's the door and whatever
The
carpentry
door, the
goes in.
frame, the glass side lights alongside of it, just that part, nothing else.
Kathy?
Just want to say thank you for taking care of that's such a historic building in our
Thank you,
town.
thank you.
Just as another note, WGBH in Boston, contact them. They have a wealth of information through This Old House.
Oh, fine, thank you.
They may be able to reach out to them, they may be able to help in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, because we really do want someone with the skill to do this right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mary, did you want?
Nope, all set.
Anybody else? Yep.
Good evening.
Sally Urbano. I came tonight with a couple of ideas to share with you. I hope to get some feedback from you. I'm kind of just at the beginning of this. But some of these ideas are because we're in crisis over in West Harwich on Captain's Row. I hope you've kind of been following the news. We are facing the loss of another historic building and the insertion of a 7,400 square foot, probably Dollar General store. We're fighting it through the planning board, but we're trying to continue on this journey of keeping the Captain's Row area for the entire town. So my first thought was, and I don't know if it would come from the administrative fund or not, would be to fund an inventory of the 25+ historic Captain's Row structures as required by the Department of the Interior for the National Register districting. We have the basic inventory, but the requirement for the National Register's inventory is much more complex for each one of the houses. So that's just one thought. The second would be, and I know Chris Clark had mentioned this before, would be funding for the West Harwich Schoolhouse roof. Not only would it help stabilize the building and keep it there for further rehabilitation processes, but apparently it also would help the town in terms of their insurance funding. I guess that's a problem. Let's see, my other thought was, and I don't know about this one either, about funding a historic preservation fund similar to the Housing Trust as a vehicle that would also accept private donations as well as CPC donations for various historic preservation projects around town. The importance of that is sometimes you need to act quickly to save something, and if we don't have any of those funds available, we have to come to CPC, then put together the project, and sometimes it's too late. And I can't impress upon you how critical it is. We are losing our character, we are losing our historic buildings, and we're trying to come up with some feasible ideas. So any ideas you guys have, would be grateful for those. And my last one, and this is one I'd like to talk with you about. This is one I probably would submit this year. We have been meeting with Sarah Kordjoff, and this is what she suggested that we do to try and save things, is she thinks that the Captain's Row area, probably also zoning, but she thinks establishing it as a historic district in that area is the primary thing we might also do to protect it. So my thought was, could we fund, or I'm thinking of, I don't know how to put this, I'm thinking of submitting this to hire a historic preservation consultant to do a feasibility study for us about the possibility of the historic district for Captain's Row. That would be the one I would do this year. And it was also suggested, and if you want to give me some feedback on this, that we might be able to take this to, if there's a special town meeting, we might be able to put that on the special town meeting to ask about that.
Questions from the board? Chris?
I'm probably the only one on the table who doesn't know who Sarah is.
I'm sorry, Sarah Kordjoff is the head of the department that, with the Cape Cod Commission, that works with historic preservation.
I see. Okay, thank you. Sally, the first idea you floated, the inventory
Yes.
of properties.
Mhm.
So if you proceeded with that, if someone proceeded with that, what would that do that doesn't happen today? What impact would that have exactly?
We're trying to put everything in place that might protect it. So this does a couple of things, and help me out, Mary, because I don't know it all. But it puts in, locally it puts in protection with the Cape Cod Commission if it is within this National Register or individually nominated. They can step in and they have much more control in terms of actually stopping or influencing the demolition of a historic building. It also gives national recognition so that in terms of tourism, people will, they look for these things, they come to these things. And what else does it do? Did I miss anything? Oh, I know, it has tax benefits for people who are restoring an old building for affordable housing or for a business. They get tax rebates to do that. So,
Anybody else from the board?
Yeah.
Robert?
I know you've been working regarding some of the houses, but is there any update of what you've been working on as far as Bishop's Terrace is concerned?
I'd like to know about Bishop's Terrace too. We keep driving by. We've tried to contact the owner. I recently got a post office box to try and talk with him there. I know we're watching it, and you can see it's following the same path of the Captain Baker House on 52.
Oh, absolutely.
So a little bit at a time, somebody puts a hole somewhere, or they pull a light somewhere, or a door comes off, and yeah. So we're facing, if we face the loss of Captain Baker House, and we don't take care of the schoolhouse, the Baptist church is another one. I don't know what's happening there. He's not. We can't get him to answer either. And then you take a look at Bishop's Terrace. If we lose those main buildings, we are Route 28 Yarmouth. That's what we are. So.
Kathy?
One of the components in the, en route to getting it registered as a historic district, I understand, is public hearings, or at least public meetings. Because I remember following the Chatham one with the Stage Harbor Road thing a couple of years ago. So sometimes you do a lot of work, and then you have the public thing, and then it falls apart. So have you done any public inquiry now, early on, before a lot of this other work gets done? Not just the owners of the historic homes, but I'm talking like the whole area that would be affected within this district, because it's going to be a combination of older homes and newer homes.
Yeah, you're talking about the historic district?
Yes.
We've actually been doing this for 5 years. We have a fairly large group. It's growing, so surprisingly, people are coming that aren't in that. But we have a very strong neighborhood group. I have an email list. We constantly go back and forth. They know their neighborhood pretty well. They're all pretty scared and want to see it happen.
Okay, so you've had at least some talks about it becoming a historic district.
Yes.
What it means to everyone there.
Yeah, we have two. There's I don't mean to always be nice. There's a great many wonderful things that are going on, like the Virginia Chamberlain House, which is that yellow house that's been redone. We're getting ready to have an opening at the Historic Commission. Duncan's done an amazing display of these homes. He's got a talk. He's going to be doing a walk, and then we also have an exhibit coming up at the Cultural Center of the drawings we had done by a noted historic preservationist from South Carolina. So what we've been trying to do is get the word out so that people understand.
And then just to backtrack to the inventory question, the inventory that the HDHC did, that's not enough information for what you need?
Yes, that's correct. So that's like the base of it from what I've looked at. The Department of Interior, it's very detailed. It requires photographs, histories, more than what we have in the. It'll save us money because we have those initial inventories, but it's much more detailed for what is it, 25 plus houses. Each one has to have this inventory done for it.
Mary, are you familiar with the advanced inventory?
I'm not, Bob, maybe more than I am.
You mean as far as what's needed for
The
this
National Register.
register? And it's just, I think as you stated, it's more detailed, pictures of the cornices and things like that. Why is this unique or historical? Much more than what the base unit does, because the base is basically, this is the building, this is the style. I think there may be some history of who owned it, but you also want to go in, because these have historical rich houses.
Right.
So you really want to go into the past owners and a little bit about their lives and things, which is way beyond what we do as a historic commission.
And ours was just the basis for the, kind of the demolition delay, the 100-year
Okay.
age list. I have one question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Through you, actually, to Bob. Wasn't there an application for, didn't we try West Harwich as being a historic district? And how long ago was that? Because I recall it, and I just don't, I can't
It was
pinpoint a
3 or 4
timeframe.
years ago, and it was,
Did it go to town meeting?
oh, no, there was one after West Harwich, too.
I'm talking West Harwich.
Yeah, no. And I believe the issue came is that it is, maybe it's not able to be funded by CPC. And I think that was the issue back with the committee, that some towns were, but most towns weren't.
Oh,
So
that was for
I'm-
the National Register.
That was for the national.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
that wasn't
national-
for a district? I thought that was for forming a
So
district.
that was, I think, the application that came before CPC for the
Right.
national, to do the
Right.
National Historic Register application. But I thought there was a movement at one point to make a historic district in West Harwich.
Oh, absolutely.
And did that make it all the way to town meeting? And
No, I
It
think.
never made it that
I
far.
think it stopped at CPC.
Well,
I think it
That was
was not
before my
funded.
time,
Maybe
so I
before
don't know.
my
So I
time.
was
There's one
12.
question I
whatever.
do have. Is this particular item that we're discussing, West Harwich alone? Are there other entities within the town that fall under that historic district area? Or that could be considered?
Oh, yeah, I mean, we
got one right
did a
here.
run at Ocean Grove, down there. That was one opportunity, and there are other pockets that we can look at.
Have you reached out to any of those
Well,
areas?
I do know those
So
other
it's
areas.
town-wide, it's not,
I think, so the way it works is you get a map and you draw on that map where you want your district to be. So in handling 25, I don't know if, it would be too large for our group to handle anyway, that many more. So what you can have, for instance, we have the Harwich Center Historic Area, then it would be the West Harwich Historic District Area, Ocean Grove, whatever else, whatever pocket, but they're sort of done individually, although you can, once you have an area established, you can enlarge that particular area. So Harwich Center could enlarge itself already. West Harwich, if it became a historic district, it could enlarge itself.
Kathy?
Is there a minimum number of structures to be included in a district?
It can be one house.
so I think we're talking two different things, right? A historic district is local, it's
Right.
a zoning overlay. Then there's a national
Right.
historic registered district is a
Right.
completely different
Right.
animal, right? So, and I don't know that it has a requirement for, an individual house can be listed, or an individual building.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Bob?
Yeah, so back to your fourth item about the feasibility study and things, and we asked about the meetings, but have you had a public meeting where you've actually invited the whole town to comment?
No.
Or, see, I think that's the key to get a historic district in a town. It's not necessarily just the people, the whole town has to buy
Absolutely,
in it.
absolutely. That's
And I
all part
think
of the
if,
process.
Even on a volunteer basis, if you could do something like that, show pictures and to see if you get people, because once you get a town support, then things go much easier.
Absolutely.
I mean, it is great that the community in West Harwich is very much for it. That was the opposite we ran into with Ocean Grove.
Right.
Is there was a lot of opposition within the community.
Right, and when, that's why I think if we could get the funds to hire the consultant to help us with that feasibility study, that also helps you establish your lines, tell you, kind of should guide you how to go about the process to make sure that you end up at the right place and it passes. Absolutely.
Any other questions from the board? None? Thank you very much.
Thank you all, I
Thanks, Sally.
appreciate your time.
Anybody else? Ed?
More just coming forward to support the previous speaker. I've been involved in trying with historic preservation efforts since I moved to town. I think the West Harwich School, it's one of the sort of markers of our villages around town. We have one of the schools in Harwich Center, one in Harwichport, and one of the buildings in South Harwich. That's are sort of identifiers of where those original villages were centered around. Unfortunately, the school buildings that were built in East Harwich and in North Harwich are no longer with us, having burned in fires. That, and then also to support doing the survey of the properties in West Harwich to move ahead with having application made for a historic district. There are several. You can do it as a local historic district, which is a town function. You can work with the state and having it done as a state historic district, and the obviously the National Historic District. Each level provides you a certain increased amount of control over what happens in the district. I think if we're looking at preserving West Harwich as a reminder of days past, having it declared a National Historic District is probably where you want to go. But it's also, you know, in doing that survey, it's not just architectural. With the National Historic District applications, filling in the information of the history of the people that build the houses and their importance in the development of the town is important, and any events that happen there is important to note in your application. I know in the past there was some, long time ago, there was some talk about attempting a historic district in Harwichport, which is also a potential. Bank Street has a number of houses that would qualify due to age, qualify due to the people who built and lived in those houses, and a couple of the buildings, principally the apartment building at the corner of Miles and Bank Street, were locales of significant events in the town history. That particular building was a sort of a riot amongst varying factions in town over the issue of slavery, which is
And that's not well known.
that's not well known at all, which is an interesting part of Harwich's past history. So I'd encourage we move ahead on support of those things. You know, we've tried numerous occasions to get somebody involved with the funding and making use of the West Harwich School. Unfortunately, we seem to, you know, say, well, you know, we hope somebody will come forward and do it like they did the South Harwich Church. And but at the same time, they expect whatever the group that is to provide most of the funding. Well, when you look at South Harwich Meeting House, most of the funding came from the CPC. And I think if we accept that as a fact of what would happen, then finding an agent, a group, or a community group, or some use for the building would become a lot easier if we weren't expecting them to sort of come up with $700,000 on their own. I think, you know, personally, it's an important building for the town to maintain, and certainly moving ahead in the nearest term with restoring the roof or redoing the roof is a critical thing to do in the near term.
Questions from the board?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? We're all set. Then can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Public hearing's closed. We're gonna move on to our regular meeting.
Time for public comment.
Yep. First in line. We're hearing none. Approval of the minutes, May 9th, 2019.
I make a motion to accept the minutes of May 9th, 2019.
Is there a
Second. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
What's that? Okay. New business, Harwich Historic District and Historic Commission follow-up report.
Okay.
Mr.
Mary,
Jones,
you have the floor.
Mr. Jones
Oh,
on.
Mr. Jones.
He is the
on.
he's the HTHC rep,
Ah,
not me.
So,
I forgot about that, you're right.
so we'd come before the committee a couple times and worked on how to, what to use those funds and get that project going. And one of the things the committee had thought that they should do is to revisit the original survey to get repair or find some of the issues with the dates, where something was in the report that was, said it was on the 100-year list, but then you just simply go back and look at the assessor's record and it wasn't. But when we looked at the grant itself from it, that really wasn't in the scope. So that at this point, we haven't started anything with that original grant. And as I
When you say grant, you mean
I'm
the
sorry,
CPC
CPC.
article.
Right.
article. So we hadn't started with that at that point. Now, interestingly, that was to determine clusters in Harwich, to identify clusters of houses and areas in the town that might be more significant than regular places. Obviously, when we hear today that some of these opportunities like Bank Street or even West Harwich probably could follow under, would follow under that. That's not really a bottom-up process. It was supposed to be a bottom-up, where we have a consultant go out the town, then come back with us with it. But these are areas clearly that are understood to be historic areas and that needed more survey. So at this point, we're kind of stuck. We haven't fulfilled in the time required. There is an opportunity to spend that on these areas that have been identified as possible future historic districts or areas of importance to drive down and get more detail. So that's kind of where we're at this point.
Chris, questions?
I really don't want to go back over the last time we talked about this
Right.
to that degree, but just briefly, if you did move ahead, how exactly would the money be spent?
It was designed for a consultant. That's, similar to what we had for that did all the whole inventory, to then go back and look at the inventory and say, oh, we've got 15 houses very close by that are over 100 years old. Should we look at that, and should we identify that as a cluster of historical significance?
And would the consultant have access to the right level of data to do that job expeditiously?
Well-
And meticulously?
The data you'd have would be, a lot of it's visual, expanding upon what you have. The other part would be going to the Historical Society, which does have a fairly good research history of a lot of different houses, strictly from a historical standpoint, not an architectural standpoint, to look at that. But also, the research would look at some deed records, possibly, to see if, there's more of a historical thing. But I think the overall would be more of an architectural and focus than probably a lot of deep history, like going for a national historic designation you need. That's not the purpose of it. It's really just to identify clusters, and that's as good a word as any in the town, that do have significant older houses that are significant.
And then, once the cluster as opposed to an individual property is
Right.
identified, what could be done with that?
Well, then you would look at that as, could this be a historic district?
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
John?
Nothing.
Nothing. Mary?
I have nothing. I heard my piece last time.
I got a question.
Kathy?
All right, so was the West Harwich area, Captain's Row, is that an identified area as a cluster?
Not yet, because we've never
But is
did
it, is it on the list of
Oh, it would-
ones that were gonna be looked at?
It would be emerged very quickly as a major one.
Okay. And
Yes.
is the work that's done to identify a cluster, is it significant enough, or at least on its way to answering some of the things that they need answered for their submissions to the higher authority?
My guess, and Bob, tell me if you disagree with me, my guess is that it would be the starting point for that, you don't even think so.
Well, no, it would be the starting point.
Be the starting point,
it
but
wouldn't
it's
be the
not
end
gonna,
all.
enough to get there.
I don't believe it would be.
I mean,
We'd have to study what the requirements are.
and based on the,
Testing.
based on the amount of money we had that was
Right.
talking, was, what, 25,000, I think,
Yeah,
that was going to identify clusters where there were 3 or more homes in a small area. Certainly there is, 20, 25 in the, probably from Herring River to down 28 to
right,
Chase Library.
yeah.
So I guess the thing is, so wouldn't their starting point be the inventory that we've already done? Isn't that like sort of the starting point?
It's the floor,
Okay,
and then they have to build up from it.
okay.
Why are we directing ourselves to the specific issue of the timeline that the money's
Yeah,
been
I'm
held?
gonna get there.
Okay, go ahead, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I mean to
So
jump.
I was just gonna backtrack and ask
Before you
the
ask that
committee.
question, Ed, go ahead.
Just a comment, if you're, for doing a filing for a national historic district, you need to do the survey not only on the older properties, but all properties that are within the district. When they did Harvard Center, the apartments were done. And the comment was obviously they weren't technically historic at the time, but they did in the survey of that particular property talk about the structures that had been on it before.
Go ahead,
Let me just
Kathy.
finish. So the $20,000 in funding for this warrant article, that we gave you a copy of the warrant of the original proposal, so
Yep.
you looked at it. And it was mostly to establish, a survey of this cluster theory. Is this something that you guys really need to do or want to do? If it wasn't written in this application, would you be pursuing that?
I'm gonna let Bob take that. It predated me being on the committee.
Would we pursue it if we didn't have the funding?
Yeah,
No.
I mean,
I mean, we wouldn't be able to.
No,
We
but-
would want to. Maybe I'm gonna jump ahead here. What we wanna do is do more of a comprehensive historical plan for the town. And that's what we're planning to ask for this year, is to do a more comprehensive to match in with the other long-term planning of the
A
town.
historic preservation
So
plan.
did you hear
Does
that
that have
right?
anything to
You're
do with
coming
clusters?
No,
forward
it
with
doesn't.
a new
Well, no, it would.
application.
It would be part of that. That's part of a plan.
But would the
might be.
plan come before the clusters?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but I'm just saying, are you trying to just use the money because it's there? Because it's been languishing for what, 3, 4 years now?
Yeah.
It's been languishing.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I think Bob has said it, we discussed at a meeting to put together an application for funds for a historic preservation, to be used to try and put together a historic preservation plan. So, that's part and parcel, that's gonna come either way.
Right.
We've
But-
already set the precedent, we've taken back
Mhm.
money from Brooks.
Yep.
So,
So
John, go ahead.
now I have a question, which is, will this, if that money gets spent this way, will that result in cabbage being chewed twice? Will it be a redundant effort,
No,
if you pardon my expression?
No,
I
that would,
mean-
that,
Never heard
I
that.
mean,
no.
that data would be incorporated then in the master plan. It would be
Right.
something that they wouldn't have to do, or, yeah, it would be something they wouldn't have to do in a master plan.
It's not something that someone you hire is gonna end up looking at and thinking maybe it wasn't done quite right and wanna do it all over again.
Yeah,
So essentially, you'd like to see a clean,
It's a question.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
not
I mean,
saying what I
what-
wanna see. I'm just asking,
Dip-
are you sure that this is the most efficient way to proceed as opposed to just rolling it into another request?
I would suspect, and it's speculation, that a master plan would not necessarily do the detail of the cluster, so.
It will not.
Right, so you'd have the master plan, then if the master plan says, oh, you have a lot of clusters, then we come back for a cluster money.
And I'm just gonna,
go ahead,
I'm
John.
gonna pipe in just on the plan issue, because we've talked about comprehensive plans a whole heck of a lot.
Right.
We have a planning board as well, and planning board did receive the funding at this year's town meeting to start the comprehensive plan process, which is a requirement every
Right.
10 years, if my memory is correct. The missing piece that we don't really have in place for a sub-plan is a historic preservation plan. So we did talk at our last meeting, and the board took a vote and made the decision that we thought that was a #1 priority.
Right.
Because just like we have a housing production plan and we have an open space and recreation plan, for those two buckets, we don't have a plan that kind of informs the historic preservation bucket. So as a group, at that meeting, we had discussed that and really felt that that was priority #1 for us to work on putting an application together for October. So,
Go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, so 3 months ago, when you presented to us, your emphasis at the time was on taking some of the properties that were in the inventory that were incorrectly noted and doing further research on some of them. Is that still a priority?
we've been doing them as one-offs, and I think we're continuing to do them as one-offs.
Yeah.
You know, as was suspected, it was
Detailed and,
a little more complex to picking them out of the air than I would have hoped initially. So we've been dealing with them as one-offs for at least 2 years, I would say, with applicants coming early before they're advertised on a notice of intent. And if they give us the right information that shows that it's not a historic building, then we take the vote to either remove a garage or
right.
or vice versa. So that's what we've been doing.
So
Well,
it-
here's where I'm gonna step in. I'd like to see the board have consistency in what they're doing. This is a particular article that has expired, as far as our timeframe's concerned. What's the board's pleasure? Chris?
So I think I would be more comfortable to turn the money back and create a new application for funding of whatever the longer-term plan is, and I would urge whoever files that application with us
Is that a motion?
to be, hang on, I would urge whoever files that application with us to have a very clear objective, a very clear end objective. Because there's something here that's worth doing, but I'm not sure what it is yet. And I need to understand what the final objective is.
Right.
But I definitely would start again with a new application.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion, just don't make me repeat it.
Well, I didn't get it. It was too wordy for me.
He's
How's that
making a
not
motion to
fair?
rescind the
Rescind
funds.
funds.
That'd be
right.
easier.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor?
We're gonna have discussion?
All right, let's have
Yeah.
discussion.
We had the discussion, essentially. Okay, we'll have a discussion.
Just
You're
saying.
the board, no?
No. It's okay.
I'm simply gonna say that, you know, part of the issue with these funds was the original inventory was still going on. And I said this the last time when we had our update. The original inventory was still going on when the application was made for this money. And the first one wasn't finished yet. It was a nice idea to be lined up for the next, you know, hindsight being 2020, maybe it was premature. But then we also had a change in town planners, and we had a lot of other things going on, and it just never happened. I will be quite honest, when I came to the CPC update for the original list as the new chairperson for historic, you, Kathy, asked me about the rest of the money, and I went, what rest of the money?
Right, you did.
I had no idea that there
You had
was,
no idea.
that there was another $20,000
Right.
hanging out there.
Right.
So, you know, for what it's worth,
We knew we weren't putting you in the spot.
no, I realized that. You knew. I did not at that point and was horrified that I didn't know that there was another $20,000 worth of CPC funds sitting out there, and it had never gone out for an RFP. So,
Okay, motion's been seconded, discussion, John?
I was just gonna add that the problem I have here is not necessarily with anything that's happening, it's that I have a hard time, and I think it's similar to what Chris is saying, just getting my arms around the whole thing, because I don't have the context, and I wasn't here before, and we have a relatively new, there's a fair amount of
wasn't
turnover.
either.
And, well, yeah, but you're very involved in historic issues. I can't say that I am. So, I'm just saying, like Chris, I think I would feel more comfortable seeing a whole proposal, so I get the whole thing and vote on that as opposed to this sort of one-off item.
Okay, the board, it's the board. So we have a motion, we have a second. Board's discussion is over. Anybody else for the discussion from the board? All those in favor?
I
Aye.
have to be consistent with my
Opposed?
other,
Did you
my
say
other
yes?
votes.
Abstain.
Abstain?
And you?
Yes.
Okay.
Ed?
Could I just ask, I know
Yep.
when, in the first year of the CPC program in the town, there was a fund, or one of the grants with skip articles, was up to do a survey of buildings, and I think it was $25,000. Do you know if that was ever finalized, or was that rescinded?
That was the first round.
And
No,
that
no, no,
was
no,
complete.
he's talking about an earlier plan,
He's ta-
Right.
way back when.
But the original monies for the list that we finalized in 2015, I think, started in 2004 or
I think
2006.
he's talking about another plan,
Oh, five?
yeah, something.
2005, which was the first year,
Yeah,
I believe.
and I think the funds that actually, were finalized with the 2015 update, I think started back that long ago. Because you had an issue where you had somebody, we had one consultant that started it, and then they couldn't finish it, and then we had the second consultant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
And I think those funds went back that far.
Yeah, it was 2006, Article 50, 25,000 for update, and that's the one you're talking about. But it languished for 10 years.
Right.
Before it was done.
And part of the reason was, well, the first reason was they went out several times for RFPs, and at the time, with CPC coming into effect all over, the consultants were all in
Busy,
demand.
right.
and Nobody was applying, and then finally they got an app of somebody who applied, who was very good, but, turns out that he and his staff had a bunch of personal problems, so they were hit or miss on how much time they could spend. And the other problem was that the Historic Commission was never very clear on giving them direction to where to go to look. They seemed to have an idea, they wanted areas, you know, not just a house here and a house there, but 10 houses here, but they never really came to
Followed
the conclusion on sending them one place to a town or another. And so the concept of having, of identifying clusters of areas to research, I think would be very good ahead of time.
Okay, moving on. Next thing, Discussion of the website updates. Kathy or John?
Not me. You know
Okay,
me, I'm
so-
cut and paste,
Literally.
literally.
Website, what we talked about at the last meeting were a couple of things. And I think we weren't, at least from my point of view, we weren't really talking about who's updating the website. I mean, the two subjects, from my point of view, were electronic submission of proposals and document retention, I'll call it. That's one. And the other is getting CPC content onto the web one way or another. That's the second. So I'd just like to talk, I have some notes, so I just trying to get all these points out. I did talk to Foster Banford a couple times, once on the phone, and then I spent 3/4 of an hour or so with him in his office yesterday. I don't think I got all my questions completely answered, but made progress anyway. So, first point I want to make is when I'm talking about electronic proposal submission, I'm not talking about nobody ever gets any paper anymore. So I just want to.
We know that.
wanna-
We're just
I'm
kidding
sure
ya,
that
we're just
I
kidding
know,
ya.
I just
lady.
wanted to state that explicitly, just to make sure that's well understood. But basically, my motivation in talking about this is I think that it can streamline and organize the submission process if it's done properly. And I also don't think that we should rush into this either. I'm not necessarily saying that we should do this, try to get something in place by July 1st. But gotta, you know, if you're gonna do something like this, gotta start talking about it sometime. So why not now? So, and we did talk a little, I think, last time about email submission, and somebody, maybe you, Mary, said, well, there are limits to file size.
There are.
And I'm not sure that's a problem or not. I mean, it would be, aside from that issue, it would be sort of the simplest, most straightforward way to set things up. And according to Foster, I mean, I didn't actually ask him that question yesterday, so I sent him an email this afternoon and got sort of an answer that I still need some clarification on. But what he said was the email server itself limits file sizes to 100 megabytes, which is pretty big. But that there's a spam filter that limits them to 35 megabytes, and I don't know who has control there. And furthermore,
It
I
might be in
also asked
Microsoft,
him-
something that's automatic.
What's that?
The spam might be something that's automatic built into the email
Usually
server.
these things are parameters that the web administrator can control. I think he said he didn't know how to do that, but I don't know. I would talk to him further about that to find out. And I mean, you suggested that some people may be submitting huge files, more than 100 megabytes, I think. And
My comment was just that I know I have tried to send files out and I've tried and
I
not
see.
received files back with my local town email. So that was where my comment was coming from.
Right, okay, so that's just an issue which I would continue to explore, that's all. The other way, which I want to talk about a little more, is that there would be a standalone website that's not actually part of the town web hosting arrangement. And that would open up a lot of possibilities. It may be possible to do file uploads inside the context of the existing hosting arrangement that the town has. And Foster, I don't think, really knew the answer to that question, and that needs further exploring. Right. So if they're uploaded somehow, either on the town website or some standalone website, they could ultimately be transferred to somebody's town user account in the Windows network. And I would suggest that if you're doing that, you probably want to set up a separate Windows account specifically for for that purpose, one way or another, which wouldn't be a big problem. I mean, just, it's like another user that somebody would have, you know, credentials to log into and deal with the files.
Mary?
My only comment with the standalone website is even if it's a standalone website, it's still town records. It still has to be preserved. It still is subject to records retention rules and all of that stuff. So even if it's not hosted on the town website, that would still be something that would be subject to.
Would there be a fee involved? Would there be a fee involved in that?
I would think so.
I'll get to that in a minute, but, right, and that's what I was just saying, is that anyway, because people on this committee and maybe town employees would want access to those files anyway, so that's why you would set up a user account on the town network, on a town server, or whatever, and the files would go there, then they'd be like any other file, and any other town employee or on the town website, they'd be on a town server, they get backed up the way Foster backs everything up, which seems like pretty solid to me, so that's that point. Now, the other thing is CPC content on the web, which we started talking about that, or at least I got triggered to talk about that because of the trifold and getting trifold available on the web, and the trifold is now available on the web.
Good job. Good job.
All I had to do was go talk to Caleb, but
Good.
whatever. But it's kind of unsatisfactory because looking at that PDF, it's like the presentation isn't the way the presentation would be with a trifold.
Right.
So naturally, what you think about is, at least the next step would be, let's just take all that content, reformat it into a linear PDF and do that. That's a job that someone would have to do. But my thought about that is, really, if that's what you're gonna do, you should probably have a native web page that hosts that content and would be more readily accessible and editable by the committee. And so, again, there's a couple ways of doing that. You could just add that content onto the existing CPC page on the town website. And the thing about that is that's not really, the town website is not, and the formats that are provided by the hosting company that the town uses, it isn't really that natural for that kind of content. The cultural center.
You have to stop for a second. Please describe what you mean by that. It's not natural for the content. I don't understand.
I just mean when you go to like the CPC page on the town website, you know, there's 3 panels, left, center, and right, and the left has one set of things, you know, links.
Standard format.
It's just a standard format, and there's this center thing which can be used to put whatever your content in, but it's very constrained.
Right.
It's not that it's impossible, but if you want to see how someone might do that, go to the Cultural Center's webpage where they've done that, and they have content, and I think there are some other departments who have a little bit of content there, and you could imagine reformatting what's in the trifold and maybe thinking and putting it there, but it's very linear. You know, there's a picture and then some text and a picture and then some text.
Yep.
So the other, and I tried to figure out with Foster whether you could have a more sort of open-ended page format within the context of the existing hosting arrangement, and the answer I got was, yeah, but we have to pay extra to get that. And I don't know whether that extra would be a gating item. So, but the other approach is just to have a standalone website. And what I mean by a standalone website is register a domain name like Harwich CPC.org or whatever. You can can register a separate domain name, and then you make a hosting arrangement with some third-party web hosting platform, and there are gazillions of them out there. I've done that before. You're talking about minimum of $100, maybe as much as $200 a year subscription fee for that. And then there are all kinds of ways you can set up a website to put the content there. And many town departments actually already do that. And a partial, I don't know that it's a complete list, but Highway Department, Water Department, Fire Department, Cranberry Valley, and Brooks Library all have their own websites with their own domain names, which they all manage independently.
But there are people assigned to do specific work on those, maintain those websites,
Yeah.
paid employees of the town.
Yeah, So, but if you have relatively static content, it's not that big a deal. And there's two ways around that. A volunteer, and it's been pointed out to me by Foster more than once, that if I'm volunteering, I might go away tomorrow, and then what? And my
Oh, God.
well, I mean, it's a natural question.
Well, it's
Why
a
would-
reality of,
Well, it's a natural question. You know, I'm not gonna be on a CPC floor.
Right.
I mean, I don't intend to go away tomorrow either, but whatever. But there's a couple answers to that. One is that someone else on the committee might be willing to do that. Another is you hire a third party to manage it. And I can't answer the question about what that would cost, but something like some standard web hosting arrangements are rather straightforward to manage and maintain. And, I've built a website where, it gets touched by me once or twice a year. And, the only time it really needs to get touched is if you want to add or change something. And it can be done in a relatively straightforward way. So that's my spiel. Like I said, I'm not thinking we're gonna have answers to this, and personally, today, but personally, I would continue to look into this. I'd like some reaction from other people on the commission or the committee. One thing to point out, there is this other question of who's maintaining the existing web page on the town website, which the answer is probably nobody because it's way out of date.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to take that on. I think it's a very minor task. The other way would be to take modifications and go to Caleb and ask Caleb to make them. And specifically, the committee membership needs to be updated
Sure.
on
Yep.
the site. So in my discussion with Foster, one of the things he suggested, and which I would like to pursue, is just me getting login credentials, and which include privileges to modify specifically the CPC webpage. He didn't want to do that until he gets some agreement from this committee.
the board.
And a word from Dave as a result. And what I would be doing would be mostly just trying to understand better what you can do and what is difficult to do with the existing website, and fix a few little things in there. That seems to need to be done.
Comment from the board. Chris?
I think your last suggestion is a great one.
Which one was that?
Get login credentials, go in and figure out what can and cannot be done easily or with difficulty. And I would agree, it's urgent to get the CPC area updated because there's some stuff that's just blatantly incorrect right now. And if you can do that via the credentials, then that would be terrific.
Yeah, I could do that.
I would certainly support that. I'd be surprised if we all wouldn't And then as it relates to the standalone page, I'm left just not understanding exactly what its advantages would be to us day to day. And I think, I don't support it, I don't not support it, I just don't know which way to go, because I don't, and I'm thinking that if you could get credentials and get in there and start fooling around a little bit in your spare time, before you leave, or that would help us better, that would help us.
You brought it up.
I didn't bring it up, Foster brought it up.
That would help us better understand how badly we need a standalone page. I would hate to have a standalone page that got badly out of date for lack of anybody paying attention to it,
So,
or that wasn't useful to us any more than what we have today is.
Mary, go ahead.
Couple of small things. The page itself, I think if you got login credentials, you will be able to see, there are different things. Obviously, you can put things on the, as a document, as a download, you can put something as a news flash. You may be able to take that trifold document and turn it into a mini PowerPoint that you click onto, and it would open, turn over, and actually get the look and feel of the document itself. But I suspect there's more storage space on those pages than we would think, because I know the Board of Selectmen's page, you upload your agenda packets every week, and those agenda packets are not small documents. So you can have 250 pages a week. So I think that information is, that space is available if you can find the right section to put it in. And my last comment was just, last year, before you were on the board, we all took a town to kind of look at their pages. And the only thing that I noticed was Dennis was the town that I had looked at, and they actually had uploaded all of their projects and all the applications for all of their projects for the last 5 or 10 years. So at least to having content, it gave somebody a place where they could kind of see what had come up in the last
how did
3
you
or 4 years.
access those?
It's right off their main, on their main.
It's like a PDF, you click on
Yep.
something and you see.
Yep,
the
so
PDF.
they had, so if you go to their CPC website, which was part of their town website, they were using the same government host that we had. I don't know if we still have the same one or not, I know ours just changed. So, it is the same, according to Jamie, so it's the same web host. You can go to their CPC page, and they have all of those applications that you could upload, and they had updates on various projects. Just as something to see if you're looking to add content.
Before we, Bob,
No, I think the first start is to understand what the Harwich page can do, and things like what Mary had just said. One of the maybe unique things why the other departments, like the community and center, is because they are so active on updating it literally every day, that just doesn't fit within the town website. That's why they needed that. Ours is going to be pretty static, update once a year. That's
are
it.
you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
You're up.
Fine. Oh, I was gonna say, we now have the application online fillable. That's a big deal for us.
It's a big deal.
It's our second year, so that's pretty good. We've been remiss in updating the content page of the town CPC thing, and I think that'd be great if we could update it and then maybe add to it as a starter. I mean, I think we should start small and then move on.
One, this is not my bailiwick, but I understand this. There has to be some kind of communication through Foster to Caleb to keep that circle going for the day that you're not here,
Jamie is.
so they can fall back and do whatever due diligence they have to on the site.
So if it's just the town website, there's nothing there, because Caleb already knows how to access it, and there's not an issue there, I don't think. It would only be, if the committee decided they wanted to go beyond that that's all.
To a standalone website.
Right, so, and I want to respond to that a little. All I'm doing is trying to identify the possibilities, and I think it would be great if someone other than me or in addition to me figured out what the committee wants to see on a public-facing website and go from requirements to how do we fill the requirements, because I'm kind of going the other way, which isn't really the right way to do things, just in order to get the conversation started. But I don't know, I'm just implicating you two who did the trifold and thought about what that should look like and what should be in it. If you could just sort of expand your thinking about taking whatever you're thinking about that and what that might look like on a web page, and we could have like a more real conversation about how to do that.
Mary?
I was just gonna say, perhaps just take a look at Dennis. If we all took a look at Dennis's website, maybe a Wellfleet or a Truro or an Eastham, to see what they have for content versus what we have for content, then we might get a sense of what we like and what we don't like. For next meeting, maybe?
Yeah, right.
Dennis CPC?
Yeah, if you go to the Dennis webpage, it's set up just like ours is,
Okay.
and they have a CPC sub-page on it.
So, just one other point there, in terms of just making any changes to the existing page. There's two parts to that. One is listing the existing membership, but there's also some narrative in there in sort of fine print, which I wouldn't right now make any changes to, but it's another thing to discuss, just very near term. Should there be some other piece of text there, and should it be formatted a little differently? Because right now it's very fine print. People are probably mostly not going to be reading that.
You're talking about what's
on?
What's
Good,
currently
good.
you're talking about what's on the town website now.
What's on the CPC page on the town website right
I,
now?
for one, would be happy to take a closer look at that.
Yeah.
And figure out what to
Right.
do.
Other than just correcting the list of committee
Of course.
Yeah.
So
I tried to get,
we'll let the English major.
I tried to get him to do it, but he didn't bite, so I'll take a look at it.
Okay. Is that okay? Are you
course.
comfortable with
It
that?
only is, anybody can look at it, but I'll certainly do that.
All right, so for the moment, to move things along, can you, at least on the page, whatever needs to be updated as far as
membership. I don't,
Membership and meeting time, is that
Times.
correct? 'Cause
adjourn, yeah, right.
I don't know if that was ever corrected.
No, it's not.
No.
No, it's not.
so, Jan, can you send me the current list of members, just so I'm not trying to do it
No,
off the top?
no,
Because you already sent it to me?
no, because y'all have,
Oh, did I,
Hold on, I've
Dave
got it,
knows.
I've got it somewhere, I just have to find it.
no. Oh, bloody. It's the fact that y'all have your appointments, your terms.
oh, right, so we shouldn't make
And
any
every
changes
time I
right
touch
now.
this, it gets, I have extremely bad luck with that. And that's why.
I'm coming up the end of the month, so.
Everybody is, but Dave.
But this is correct as of today.
Yes,
But if you see on the right hand, the terms,
Yeah,
Oh.
but we should always have the current list in there. I mean,
but the
whether
terms
it's
are
on-
listed on the
Exactly, whether
website
you're
too.
expiring tomorrow.
On the membership
Put
list.
this
I
on the
agree.
website, and when it changes, I'll change it.
Yeah.
I mean, what else is there to do?
Nothing?
Just change the time of the meeting.
yeah,
Yes.
Yes. The time of the meeting states that it's at 7.
Oh.
And we've been 6 for
Yeah, okay.
2 years.
2 years?
easy 2 years.
and John,
Okay.
please make a copy of that and get it back to me, please.
No,
Here-
did you
here,
send,
Dave.
Oh, do you have one too?
I understand. Watch it not be in here because I just changed it.
Oh, no, is there any writing on the back of that? No, that's not, that's
Well,
fine.
this is all, it has to be redone anyway, because it's all saying June 19.
Right, I understand. I need a copy of that.
Didn't you send
You
this
can
out,
stop by the
Helen?
clerk's office tomorrow.
Do I have it in my
Yeah, but-
email?
Yeah, I wanted to send
That's where it
another
came from.
one.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
It looks
We're
like
all
that's
set.
where
I
it came
just don't
from.
want to,
We're all set.
I just don't want
All right, okay.
it's just, I have such bad luck with it, I just,
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
I lost the damn,
would you please?
this. I got a copy, that's fine. All right, any more comments?
Nope.
Thank you. All right, next to meeting, anything on the old business?
This, homework.
Well, on the next meeting agendas, this will be back on, so you'll have
Okay.
anything else anybody wants on the agenda? Chris?
So the application is ready to roll?
Yeah, Mary just has, I sent all the corrections in to Mary, and Mary just has to reformat it a little bit,
Okay,
just tweak it a little bit.
all right.
It's good to go.
Okay.
We added in the statement, we added in, or took out and corrected the punctuation and spelling, so it should be good to go.
Do we have to wait until July 1, or can it go earlier?
I will take a look at it this week and get it back to Kathy so it can get uploaded.
Well, you can just send it right to Caleb to
Okay.
upload. I don't
Do
need
that.
to, I'm
Yep.
done with it.
All right, that's fine.
Great.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anything else? Anything else?
So you will speak to Foster?
Yes, I will. I'll see him tomorrow. I'll call. Bob? Kathy?
Good.
Mary?
Nothing.
Chris? Move to adjourn?
Do we have to do anything about the confirmations? No? The appointments?
No?
No? Or will we be getting letters?
I'm guessing. I wish I knew that we could have asked the selectmen when they were still in the room.
I got a letter like last month saying, please inform us if you don't want to be reappointed.
I didn't get one of those.
But did you get it for,
Which one did you get it for?
I got it for planning
Conservation.
board.
I think I got two.
But John's a
You probably
selectman
did.
appointee.
I usually put them together.
No, he's
I
a
only got
select-
planning
he's
board.
a selectman's appointee.
Oh, he's conservation.
You conservation?
I am.
He's the
the selectman
selectman's
guy.
appointee.
You're the select.
Oh, sorry.
I also got a letter saying, let us
So
know. if
two
you're not-
people
I didn't get a letter.
Wait a minute.
You
I'm
didn't
just
go?
assuming you're still on.
See, it's
Yeah.
this.
I already figured.
We won't have
You're up
room.
this year?
Mm-hmm.
I only got a planning board one, so
Three of you guys got a letter then.
I got a planning board one.
I need a quorum for next month.
And then
That's
my
all I
planning
care
board,
about.
and then my planning board has to vote me back on.
And you'll have a meeting
And we have to
before
vote.
next.
I think, are you still on? You're good, right?
I'm good for another year.
So we don't have to do anything.
Nope.
We're set.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have a good night.